everyone. I'm Judith Bell, and I'm the president of PolicyLink, and I am just thrilled to welcome you all here this morning for Going Local, Place-Based Solutions to Combat Poverty. PolicyLink is a national research and action institute focused on advancing economic and social equity by lifting up what works. Our work is grounded in the conviction that equity, just and fair inclusion so that all can participate and prosper, must drive all policy decisions. Today, you're going to hear a lot based on our tagline of lifting up what works. You'll hear it from our honored guests, whether they're the Secretary of a federal agency, the National Domestic Policy Advisor, or representatives from communities that have recently been designated as promise zones. It'll basically be the theme that runs through our program today. Today's event is focused on some of the key strategies that are being used to advance President Obama's Ladders of Opportunity agenda. It's focused on changing a very unfortunate reality in America today, and that's that where you live has an enormous impact on how you live. And low-income communities, communities of color, are too often places that lack access to opportunity. They lack access to transportation, to get a good job, to a safe, healthy, and affordable place to live, or a good school. The President's Ladders of Opportunity initiative is focused on changing this reality. It seeks to make sure that no matter who you are or where you are from, that if you're willing to work hard, you should be able to find a good job, feel secure in your community, and get paid wages that will allow you to support yourself and your family. And the Ladders of Opportunity agenda is solidly rooted in the experience in low-income communities and communities of color across the country. It has supported a range of efforts from Promise Neighborhoods to Choice Neighborhoods, the Burn Criminal Justice Initiative, Sustainable Communities, and much more. Focused, place-based effort, engaging community leaders in partnership and building off their leadership. These are all developing promising practices to solve some of our nation's greatest challenges. PolicyLink has been deeply engaged in a lot of this work through the Promise Neighborhoods Institute at PolicyLink, through our work with Sustainable Communities Initiative grantees, and our work with Healthy Food Financing grantees as well. We have seen how much these efforts matter in improving the lives of low-income people and communities of color across the country. And it's because of this experience that we have been so honored to be a supporter of these efforts and to be here today to talk about the Promise Zones effort. So before we get started, I want to encourage those of you who tweet to utilize the Twitter handles based on today's agenda. You can live tweet your thoughts and comments using the hashtag #TalkPoverty. And then additionally, you should all have a 5x7 card. And as you're listening, if you have questions that you'd like to submit for the panelists, you should hold them up. And then someone from PolicyLink, if the PolicyLink folks can wave their hands, will come around and take your card, and they can give you another one if you'd like it as well. And then we'll use these in the question and answer period. And finally, I want to thank PolicyLink staff, particularly Lisa, Kyler Miller, Shantha Sussman, and Marley Clements for all they did to make today possible. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Angela Glover Blackwell, our founder and CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I am Angela Glover Blackwell, founder and CEO of PolicyLink, and welcome. We are so delighted that you are here, and we are delighted to have this conversation. A conversation about why place matters. A conversation about ladders of opportunity. A conversation about how we open up the opportunities in this country to everyone. We at PolicyLink have felt from our beginning, and we're 15 years old last month, from our very beginning, we have felt that what we needed was communities of opportunity all over this nation. Communities that support children and families, communities that connect adults to employment throughout the region, communities that have good schools and safe neighborhoods and all the things that are important. We know that communities have been doing this really all over the world and all over the nation since the beginning of time, trying to figure out how to create places that link people to opportunity and provide what's needed. What's so exciting now is to see policy at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level, aligning itself with the aspirations of people in the context of the places where they live. And so this is an exciting opportunity, and we are beyond thrilled to have an illustrious panel to help us get into this conversation. But I just want to add a couple of more things. Many of you know that this summer, PolicyLink at the Center for American Progress released a book called All in Nation. All in Nation was an attempt to really look at the federal policy agenda and think about the nation's future. A future in which so many people are at risk of being left behind if we don't act on what we know. And that when we act on what we know and connect everybody to opportunity, everybody benefits. The truth of the matter is, when we help those who are most likely to be left behind, we help the nation, we contribute to growth, we contribute to the democracy. And so All in Nation is a book that really says how to do that step by step using federal policy, how to build an all-in nation. And you have a primer in your hand that says that equity is the superior growth model for building an all-in nation. Just and fair inclusion, focusing on our shifting demographics. We know that by 2043, the majority of people in this country will be people of color. And if they continue to be left behind in poverty and unemployment and poor health, the future for the nation is not bright. And when you think of the people who live in rural communities, who are white and poor, when you think of people who live in native country, we see that so many people in this country need the investment that All in Nation is calling for. And so this conversation goes from those observations to the work that is underway right now. And we have a panel that is really, you couldn't ask for better. We have Cecilia Muñoz, who is the Assistant to the President and Director of White House Domestic Policy Council. We have Shaun Donovan, Secretary of U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We would have had Arnie Duncan, but at the last moment he could not come because he was called away to something very important. But the Department of Education is a full partner in all of this work. But we do have Anthony Foxx, who is Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and we do have Tom Vilsack, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. Let's thank them for being here. Start right in with Cecilia Muñoz and get her to talk about why within the context of the President's Ladders of Opportunity initiative, which we heard him talk about at least twice now, and I've heard him more often speak of it, how do place-based initiatives fit into the Ladders of Opportunity?
So first of all, thank you, Angela, for your leadership, both in convening this forum by doing this work. You should know that you provide a lot of inspiration for the work that we do across the nation. And I also send Secretary Duncan's regrets. There are few things that trump being at an event like this with the kind of people who are here, and one of them is a request from the President of the United States, and that's what Arnie's doing today. He's with the President making actually a tremendously important announcement about bringing connectivity to 99% of students at their desks in our schools within the next 5 years. It's a very important initiative, and it is not unrelated to what we're talking about here. In that, as you've heard the President say many times, your zip code should not be the determinant of whether or not you have opportunity in this country. That's not who we are, and that happens too often, and that's something that the federal government can and should be in a position to work as partners with local leadership to do something about. And I want to underscore that and really thank my colleagues in the President's Cabinet who are here, and our other colleagues in the President's Cabinet who are not at this event, but who are deeply, deeply engaged in this work. I mean, it is not a small thing to have a huge cross-section of the President's Cabinet all in, and that this is the secretaries themselves, as you can see, on this notion that the federal government needs to be a better partner with local leadership in local communities who are identifying what I think of as the tipping point, like where you need to get in order for opportunity to become available again. And our job is to be the best possible partners we can be in helping local leaders achieve that, right? This is not about the federal government telling folks what they should be doing or about federal largesse necessarily. This is about changing the way that we work with each other and changing the way that we work with local leadership. And so the significant piece of the place-based vision
frankly has to do with a little humility on our part, that the leaders of the Choctaw Nation, the leaders of the cities of Los Angeles or San Antonio or Philadelphia know a little something about what it's going to take in order to make opportunity available, and we can do a better job of consolidating what we do across the federal government to make that possible, and to be on the local team in making these things happen. So that's, I think, a central piece of our place-based vision, and our work is about making sure that we are not operating in separate units, right? Funding streams tend to flow from Congress to the federal agencies, and it's pretty easy to be focused on making education grants or making housing grants or making transportation grants. What we're trying to do is create a whole which is greater than the sum of its parts, and to work in a collaborative way across the federal government and with local government in a place-based strategy to really make opportunity real in as much of the country as we can.
Thank you so much. I'd like to turn now to Secretaries Donovan and Vilsack to talk about how place-based work advances the goals of your agencies. I know that you both have been involved, and I'm hoping that this doesn't feel like an add-on, but a deepening of what it is that you're already trying to accomplish.
So, first of all, I would say just thank you to you and all your leadership. Happy 15th birthday as well. So, I guess from my perspective, what this work has allowed us to really do is to take what I have seen happening at the local level. I come out of local government. Many of us have worked, whether it's Mayor Vilsack or Mayor Foxx here, Arnie's work in the city of Chicago. I think what we saw, just to build on what Cecilia said, really about 50 years ago, a transformation of the way local work was done to a kind of comprehensive community development model. And maybe the best way to say it is, if the federal government in urban renewal or public housing used to say, from the distance of Washington, D.C., well, I see a problem in this neighborhood. We're going to come in, sort of wipe it away, create a tabula rasa and start again. And you can think of that in public housing. You can think about the way our freeways, I think about the South Bronx as a New Yorker, cut through neighborhoods, decked over neighborhoods. It was really we in the federal government see only problems. We see a cancer to be cured, and we're going to come in and tell you how to do it. And in opposition to that, you saw this explosion of what I call the third sector, local community organizations and others who started to plan in a different way. And I guess the way I see this work at HUD is that we have begun to bring HUD into the 21st century, and hopefully our broader work around neighborhood revitalization to really see it, as Cecilia said, through the eyes of local communities. What are the assets on the ground, not just what are the problems, and how do we build on that vision in the local community, but also set a high bar and set standards. So I think if you look at the way we're providing funding, and let's be honest, the federal checkbook is incredibly important in getting these, helping these move forward, to not only be competitive, through generally competitive processes to really challenge communities to bring their A game, but also to really build relationships with philanthropies, with others, with the private sector to bring capital to these places. So just one example, Hope 6, as many of you know, was an effort to transform public housing, which I think in many cases was quite successful. We've built on that with choice neighborhoods. And one of the things that I'm proudest of is that for every dollar we're putting into choice neighborhood communities, 8 other dollars are coming to those communities from the private sector, philanthropies, state and local government. So we really are seeing folks not just talking the talk, but walking the walk in terms of putting their money into these communities. So I really see this, and that's just one example, as taking what happened at local levels and was starting to happen in the federal government to a whole new level with the work that we're doing, not only in choice neighborhoods, but now particularly with promise zones.
Thank you. Yes.
Angela, I first of all want to thank you for a lengthy conversation we had on the phone many months ago, which I think really helped us formulate our Strike Force initiative at USDA. 703 counties in this country are persistently poor. 85% of them are in rural America, not inner city America. And frankly, there are times when I believe in this conversation of poverty, we sometimes forget the rural folks who are suffering, and we suggest that most rural poverty is white poverty, not necessarily the case. So we began a process of trying to figure out what we could do at USDA with our extraordinarily comprehensive nature of programs to address this issue of persistent poverty. And what we first realized was that there was a need for intensive care, intensive focus, and a need for us to bring all of our mission areas, our conservation folks, our farm loan folks, our rural development folks together as a team. It's been mentioned that we have to focus on what the local needs are. In rural America, I think there's a significant disconnect between the federal government and these persistently poor areas. It isn't a situation where we've come in and tried to impart our wisdom. It's a situation where for many, many years, those folks have been ignored. And they've not, frankly, been able to play the competitive game because they haven't had much success. So our vision of Strike Force was to send our team down and align ourselves with a community building organization, someone who had instant credibility in the community. It wasn't we're here from the federal government to help. It's we're from the federal government here to learn and to address and identify projects and programs that are important to you. And then we would, in a sense, guarantee success in the federal process. We'd show the way so once learned, folks could replicate that. In 20 states now, Strike Force has been working, and now we're part of the Promise Zone effort as well. In 20 states, we've done over 80,300 actions. It could be a home loan, it could be a conservation project, it could be a small business loan, it could be a community facility where we financed a school, a hospital, something of that nature, a library. $9.7 billion of loan guarantees and grants have been invested in these Strike Force areas. And as a result of this, we've learned the need for us to dedicate and hold USDA accountable for guaranteeing that a certain percentage of our resources are always invested in these persistently poor areas. So we've developed the 20 by 20 by 2016 program, which is 20% of our resources will be invested in the counties where the census tract shows 20% poverty or greater by 2016. We're at 18.756% as of last year. We'll get there. So that's one aspect of place-based. There's another aspect, and that is that there's an interesting gap in agriculture. There are very large agricultural operations, and there are very small agricultural operations. And as the president has talked about the eroding middle, that's no more true than in agriculture. And so we have tried to design a program and an assistance and effort that is place-based in the sense that the way to rebuild the middle in agriculture is by having local and regional food systems that basically allow farmers not the opportunity to compete in a commodity market where they are disadvantaged if they are not large and not overly efficient, but where they have a direct relationship with the consumer, where they are able to sell directly to the consumer, negotiate directly with the consumer. That consumer might be an individual at a farmer's market, or it may be the principal or superintendent of a school district. The ability to essentially create economic opportunity by focusing on local and regional systems. And so we've enlarged growing seasons by investing in high tunnel houses. We've invested in expanded farmers markets and food hubs. We've got a farm to school program that's now in 42 states, impacting 2.8 million kids, having access to locally and regionally grown food. And we want to expand and grow on this. And with the farm bill that hopefully, knock on wood, gets passed today by the Senate, there's substantial amount of resource that will allow us to continue to expand on that. So in two ways, our efforts have been very much dedicated to place and dictated. And from it, we've learned within USDA how to collaborate. And now through Promise Zones, we're going to learn how to collaborate with our sister agencies.
Well, thank you. Those were really very insightful answers, and I'm going to return to you in a moment and talk about exactly what the benefits are from this kind of learning in terms of sustainability and other things. But I want to turn to you, Secretary Foxx. When I think about transportation, I think about place. I don't know if the Transportation Department sees itself as the ultimate place-based initiative, but in many ways, people who are dependent on transportation certainly define their communities often by the presence or the absence and the accessibility of transportation. But how do you see transportation fitting into the place-based work?
Well, thank you, Angela, and like others, I want to thank you for your leadership and for bringing us together. In the Department of Transportation, I often say to our team that we're not just responsible for helping people get places better, we're also engaged in the work of making places better. And that is the product of local vision. I'm a mayor. My most immediate background before being here was as a mayor. And just to put a finer point on how this problem affects local communities, I could look at my city and I could see 25% of it growing very robustly and continuing long into the future. But 75% of my city was declining. Property values were teetering. It was a very difficult situation. And you can imagine that 25% shrinking over a period of time to 20%, to 15%, to 10%. And then all of a sudden you're in a place where you can't develop the revenues to continue regenerating that city. So one of the things that we try to do in the Department of Transportation is we try to take the vision that the local community has and we try to help them actualize that vision. And this effort of the promise zones coupled with other efforts like the choice neighborhoods and sustainable communities, what they're really about is us at the federal level just figuring out a way to team and leverage each other to get results on the ground. And let me give you a couple of examples of how it actually works. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with Mayor A.C. Wharton in Memphis, which is one of the sustainable community cities. And in his city, a lot of the workforce, a lot of the low-income workforce, has to go outside of Memphis for work. And he had a particular problem in a neighborhood where the transit system literally didn't have a line to take people to get to work. So folks were having a challenge getting there. Within 36 hours, our team had worked with him on some technical assistance, and we're well on the way to getting that bus line there. Now that's a line of opportunity for folks who today were challenged not to have it. But it could be a line in Memphis. It could be a streetcar project in San Antonio that will link affordable housing to the central business district. It could be Columbus, Ohio, where there's a freeway that separated a low-income community from the central business district, providing not only a physical barrier to where the jobs were, but also a psychological barrier to young people who are growing up seeing that fence in front of them. Well, the mayor there is capping that freeway. So now there's going to actually be a park, a greenway that's going to link that neighborhood back into the community. So we cannot understate the impact of the built environment in terms of organizing the way people think about themselves and their connection to the larger world, to the larger economy. And the fact that creating access, physical access through transportation, but also the fact that in many cases transportation provides a catalytic spur to revitalize a community. Those are all pieces of what we see as our work at USDOT.
Terrific, it's terrific. I like that line of opportunity. That's a good line. I want to come back though to talk a little bit about what you've learned from your place-based work. I picked up a couple of things from your opening comments about authenticity and sustainability, but I'd like to just go a little deeper about that before I turn to Cecilia to talk about promise zones.
So I guess a few things I would say. One is this work ain't easy. And for any of you that has experienced the federal government, even been inside the federal government, for most folks to say, well, we actually, on sustainable communities or in promise zones, we had folks from every one of these agencies in a room together, evaluating applications, making decisions together. That may not sound revolutionary, but those of you who know the federal government know it's pretty revolutionary, right? And what you find is when you start to do this work, there are a tremendous number of barriers that stand in the way, from using, on homelessness, using different data between us and the Veterans Administration, having different ways that, grants can be done, different legislative. So one is it takes persistence and it takes real leadership. And I want to thank Cecilia and the president directly for really pushing us to keep doing this. So one, we got to stay at it, and we got to make sure that it's 3 years from now institutionalized into what our agencies are doing. Second thing I would say, and Tom really hit on this, is that, and I mentioned competitive processes, the lack of capacity that often exists at places that have not had tax revenues over a long period of time, that have seen persistent poverty, is a critical barrier. And so one of the most important things that we've done in bringing teams to the ground, whether it's what we're planning to do in promise zones, what we've done in sustainable communities or strong cities, strong communities, bringing a really high quality federal team to the ground to say, what can we help? Where are the best ideas coming from? We can connect you to other communities. Though that's very, very important in terms of building capacity, and strike forces that Tom talked about is a great example too. But at the same time, what we find is that even with places, a mayor like A.C. Wharton, or where they have a strong vision, they've organized their own community, the federal government is so opaque to them, right? Either they have to go to 18 different places to get answers to the questions they want, and even if they can find the right 18 people, it might take them 6 months to get an answer, and it might be the wrong answer at the end, right? So part of what we're doing is figuring out, and saying to a mayor, for example, or in promise zones, community leaders, what are the 5 most important things to you? We're going to organize a team around that, and they're going to be on the ground, sitting in your offices, and it's going to be like the bat phone. I don't know if folks remember the bat phone, but it was in the cake plate, the red phone. You can lift up the cake plate, you pick up the red phone, and you can get on the other end of the line somebody who can solve your problem, right? And what we find a lot, we talk about statutory change. There's a lot that we can do if we roll up our sleeves, get the right people on the phone, and get creative about how to get to yes in this work that we're doing. So these federal teams have both been about capacity building, but also about how to demystify and improve the way the federal government works in these communities. And the last thing I would say that is a real powerful lesson to me is one thing that communities lack is real information to be able to make the best decisions on equity. And one of the things that we've just, we put out a rule we call on affirmatively furthering fair housing, where for the first time for the entire country, we're going to map a whole series of opportunity indicators, not just quality of schools, but quality of healthcare, access to transportation, housing quality, all mapped by income, by race, ethnicity. And what's powerful about this is not only helping local officials be able to make decisions, well, where should I be focusing? What tools do I need to bring to these neighborhoods? I need healthcare, I need help on criminal justice, I need help on housing, but also, frankly, putting the power of that information into the hands of individuals. And what do I mean by that? We have 2 million of our lowest income families in the country who use Section 8 vouchers. Now we partnered with Arnie. Every time one of those families is, we recertify their income, we give them data about the quality of the schools in their community. And as they're making decisions about where to move, they now know, hey, if I want the best schools for my kids, these are the places I ought to be looking. We can do the same thing on healthcare, on a whole range of. So I really do think one of the unique responsibilities of the federal government is to drive the data piece of this so that we can put the power in the hands of communities, but also individual families.
Yes.
I'd say a couple things. I mean, first of all, it works.
Good.
It's nice to know that when you have a vision and you set up a program, that you see it being embraced by the local folks and used by the local folks. We have seen increases in every strike force area where we have focused, and we anticipate and expect with promise zones we'll see the same, of increased participation in the programs, increased results. So it works. Learned that. Secondly, accountability is important. I mean, I would certainly echo everything that Shaun said, but I'd add to it that we have to hold our agencies accountable for results. We have to hold our local and regional folks accountable for results, and they have to report back to us because when we hold them accountable for results, interestingly enough, we get results. Third thing I would say is this promise zone concept, yeah, it's a stunning observation. This promise zone opportunity, I think, will unlock the creativity of the bureaucracy. You know, we have a tendency to be very critical of people who work in the federal government. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of hardworking, good folks who work in the federal government. But they have been, by virtue of the way in which legislation is created and programs are created, they themselves have been siloed. And their creativity has been stifled. Well, now, Arnie Duncan calls me up on the phone and he says, hey, we're trying to get beginning teachers and young teachers to go to rural areas. Because the reality is that rural schools basically don't have the experienced teachers. They can't attract teachers. It's harder because they can't pay them as much and so forth. Is there anything that USDA can do to provide incentives for a young person to want to teach in a rural area? Well, it just so happens that we could maybe create a housing opportunity where you could buy a house with no down payment. Maybe we could provide housing and fees assistance in terms of buying a home, the fees that you have to incur. Maybe we could buy down those fees, and maybe we could create enough roots for that teacher that at the end of 2 or 3 years, they're not interested in necessarily leaving. They're interested in establishing themselves as part of the community. So it unlocks the creativity of our folks. And I think it's an unlimited opportunity here. And the last point I would make is that far too often the federal government doesn't receive the acknowledgement for the assistance it provides. And I think we have to be a bit more better at marketing what we actually do so that people know that USDA has a housing program. They know that we finance housing, schools. They know that we finance hospitals. I'm not sure what goes on at HUD, but my guess is that Shaun's got a million programs that I am not aware of. And if I'm not aware of them, how can we expect folks who have not been involved in government? So we need to do a better job of marketing so that people understand the connection.
Thank you. Cecilia, before you have to go, we knew that Cecilia had to leave early. Could you talk about why we now have promise zones? So we have promise neighborhoods, we have choice, we have Sustainable Communities Initiative, we have the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, we have the Burn Initiative, each one taking a piece of what has to happen in local communities and making sure that the federal government is in partnership. What does promise zones add?
Well, so in some ways, that's this is the question the president asked me when I first became the domestic policy director, which is, we have a number of really good things that we're doing, good place-based things. We have choice neighborhoods and promise neighborhoods and burn grants and a whole range of other things that Angela just named. But what we don't have is a coherent story to tell people about what it is that we're trying to achieve with these things. And we don't have a way to knit them together. We're not being visible in knitting them together so that we get to a whole which is greater than the sum of its parts. This is not about creating and implementing a collection of different programs among different federal agencies. This is about being a federal government working as an effective partner in making good stuff happen in communities where change is really happening. As Secretary Vilsack said, this stuff works. These are not intractable problems. And the federal government, we're in a debate in this country about the role of government in people's lives, and we have a perspective on that debate. And that, it's not just that perspective is better served when we have one approach that aggregates what we're doing, but also communicates what it is that we're seeking to do. It's that we think the impact is ultimately likely to be greater. So promise zones really came out of that question that he posed really to all of us about how can we take what we're doing and make it one thing and think about it, as you heard Secretary Donovan say, from the point of view of a mayor or the leader of a neighborhood association or a faith-based group or whoever it is that is approaching the federal government for support partnership in achieving, some tangible, measurable goals that they can be held accountable for. And so we developed an approach so that, if you're the mayor or whoever it is coming forward, it should feel like there's one door instead of 27 different doors. right? Your job in a local community is not to figure out all of the clockwork within the federal government, which is, complex and frustrating and all of that. That's like our job. Your job is to tell us, this is how we can make sure all of our kids graduate from high school, or this is how we can make sure everybody's living in a healthy community, or whatever it is. And our job is to figure out the clockwork so that we're good partners. So we've announced 5 promise zones. The president has announced that there will be 20. If we are successful in our conversations with the Congress to up the funding levels for the programs that we're talking about, we may be able to do better than that. But one way or another, we got 3 more years to do what we're doing, and what we would like to leave behind is not just 20 stronger communities, although we definitely want to leave that behind. We want to leave behind a federal government that is working differently with each other and with local communities. And we want to leave behind a legacy where the folks who are competing for Promise Zone grants right now are setting up coalitions, collaborations of all kinds of different kinds of partners. They're setting goals. They're figuring out how they can measure those goals. They're figuring out how they can begin to be accomplishing them. That conversation all by itself is the kind of change that we're seeking to develop. Whether or not folks ultimately get selected, the process of getting there is how change happens, and how we will be participating in helping grow opportunity, not just in 20 places, but 50, 100, 1,000, which is what we're after. And my apologies for having to leave early.
But thank you for being
here. I leave you in
here.
awfully good hands.
Thank you for being here, and that was really helpful. Now I want to turn to each of you and to talk about what you hope will be achieved through the Promise Zones. I'll start with you, Secretary Foxx.
Well, I mentioned it before, the idea that a local vision can be actualized and we can play a role in helping to get there is incredibly exciting. And one of the things we haven't shed a lot of attention on is these promise zones, when they're announced, in some ways it's a bit of a badge of courage to the local communities too, because in many cases these communities have seen these particular areas struggling over a long period of time, and it's felt intractable and felt unchangeable. And when there are a group of people that come together in a community and say, hey, we want to change this, having the federal government say, we want to help you, actually enables them to get even more done at the local level than they thought possible. So I'd love to see our Department of Transportation playing a role as is needed in these efforts. And as I said, I was in San Antonio a couple of days before the announcement of the Promise Zones, and just coincidentally, by the way, and I was talking to the mayor there about the streetcar project. It's a huge catalyst project for San Antonio and will help lots of folks in the margins. And by help, what I mean is not just creating a new mode of transportation. What I mean is these projects can be catalysts for job creation, for new housing stock, for multi-use developments that in many cases can create a situation where a family that is transferring 2 and 3 times to get to work now can actually work down the street, which saves time, so mom can now go to the PTA meeting and help kids with homework. I mean, that's how real this is.
That's terrific. I want to hear from the other two, but I just want to plant a question too as you're talking about what you hope will be achieved. It's really nice that the first 5 really represent a nice cross-section of the nation. We have native country, we have rural America, we have urban America, we have both spread out cities and not so spread out cities. How do we make the kind of change that we need when we have that kind of variety? Now, we need the variety because these are the places, but we don't really have an experiment going here where we can say we did 5 in a place like Chicago, or we did 3 in a rural community. So how are you thinking that we're going to achieve results that will really help us moving forward? The variety is good, but the variety is challenging.
Yeah, look, I think the answer to that goes to the point that Cecilia was making. If we just think about this as 20 places, we're failing by definition, right? And part of that, make sure to understand that Tom is getting to a lot more places than the promise zones with strike force and the range of things that he talked about. I'm getting to a lot more places with choice neighborhoods. Arnie's getting to more places with promise neighborhoods. Anthony's getting to more places with Tiger grants and the range of things. So the ultimate hope is that, one, we're changing the way we're working in all of these communities, and that we're measuring that to be able to have a much larger sample, if you will, than just the 5 or 20 places you talked about. But also that this really drives, I talked about the $8 for every dollar we put in. We're already seeing huge investments from the philanthropic side. In Detroit, you know the numbers better than I did, a streetcar line that's being put in, they raised $1 billion of private money. Sorry, 100 million. I'm an optimist. They will raise $1 billion. Yeah, $1 billion's a goal. Right. But 100 million of private money towards a public transportation project is a big deal, right? And so that also helps replicate this in terms of the work that's being done. So I think we get to a much bigger sample, but we do have to make sure that we are measuring that in a very clear way. Look, I do want to also go back to the question that you asked, which is, what do we hope that we get out of this? And one, to be very, specific about it, we have to get to a point where how well a kid does in school or how hard the parents are working to get ahead is more important than the zip code in these neighborhoods, right? And that's the measure. But part of it too is I hope that it really begins to change the math of this conversation in Washington, D.C. If you think about that, the 20% of kids growing up in poverty in this country cost us $500 billion a year, every year, in lost productivity and wages. That's 4% of GDP. And we could, if we do this right, this work will pay for itself many times over. And that's part of the measurement that we need to be doing. It is about showing that this isn't just good for residents of our persistently poor neighborhoods. This is good for the federal taxpayer too, because ultimately these investments will pay us back over a long period of time. And that's a really important thing that I think we need to show through the measurement that we're doing.
Yes.
The rural areas and tribal areas that we'll be engaged in, we have pretty ambitious goals. We'd like to see a reduction in poverty, and we'd like to take the edges off what poverty causes in families. Secondly, we'd like to create economic opportunities so that communities no longer are so reliant on tax supporting institutions, but actually are creating tax-paying institutions. So there's a mindset change. And frankly, through this conversation, my hope is that we are able to, for a period of time in this town and in many of the major cities of this country, put a spotlight for just a second on the importance of rural America. And that rural Americans are part of this conversation, because all too often in this town, they are not.
You are so right. We have this conversation in our office all the time, that so many of the issues that we worry about aren't just in urban areas, and you're right, rural areas aren't just poor white people. When you look at so many areas of the country, people of color, Latino, African American are also rural. We have to become one nation, and to really think about that in all of our policy work. One of the questions is probably for you, and it asks whether or not healthy food access will be a part of the Promise Zone strategies.
Well, there's no question. If you're really interested in kids performing well in school, if you're interested in reducing healthcare costs, access to healthy foods makes a difference, and that's one of the reasons why the President's been so insistent on making this part of the Promise Zones. We have a healthy food financing initiative, which you alluded to earlier. USDA is part of that, and we're making a difference. We're beginning to address food deserts. We're beginning to create opportunities through some creative thinking. We have mobile grocery stores that are going around inner city Chicago. We've been able to use the bully pulpit to encourage grocery stores to locate in inner city Detroit. as part of our mission at USDA, but we're also creating opportunities in rural areas to expand the selection of healthy foods. And we're using our resources, our business and industry loan program, our value-added producer grant program, our farmers market promotion program to create food hubs, sources of local and regionally produced food. And we're certainly encouraging local schools to incorporate that with our Healthy Hunger-Free Kids efforts. So there's a lot going on in the nutrition space.
Promise Zones can build on that.
Promise Zones can absolutely build on that and should build on it. The Treasury Department should be using its new market tax credits, and Shaun and Anthony can use resources to basically get transportation and maybe a CDBG grant that creates opportunity. I mean, there is an unlimited way of addressing these problems if that's the problem that the local communities has addressed as the thing that they want us to focus on.
I have a question about measurement, how it will be measured. You started to talk about that, and whether they'll be short-term and long-term. But one of the things that comes to my mind when I think about measurement is making sure that the people who have been in these communities during the hard times get to stay as they improve, and that we don't see a displacement. And is that part of what we'll be looking at?
Absolutely, and this has been, I think, one of the challenges. You think about Hope 6, for example, where too often the revitalization was something that happened to the residents of the community, not for the residents of the community. And so we have changed a set of policies as we went to choice neighborhoods that very specifically say that you have to replace affordable housing at least 1-for-1. You can't have a reduction of what's there. And 2, that there's always a right of return for residents as you're doing this kind of revitalization. So 1 is just putting in place specific measures to make sure that we're not having those kind of consequences that you talked about. And 2nd is tracking families, right? It's one thing to say the neighborhood income level has gotten better, right? That conditions are better on a neighborhood basis, but we have to, and we will be putting in place evaluation tools that allow us to track individual kids, families, as we progress. Because I think that's where too often on an evaluation basis it's been lost, where you can say general things about the neighborhood income levels or employment levels have improved, but that may be because you're losing families from that community.
I have to chuckle at that question. We want people to stay in rural America. The reality is that people are leaving. And this is a very interesting statistic and one that troubles me and should trouble everybody in this audience. For the first time in the history of this country, since we've started keeping track of population trends, we actually lost net population in rural America. And the reason why you all ought to be concerned about this, just one statistic. Rural America is now 15% of America's population, but somewhere between 35 and 40% of the military in this country comes from rural America. So if fewer and fewer people live in rural America, where's the military going to come from? Just a thought.
Yeah, I have lots of questions here, but I wanted to know if you wanted to say something about the measurement, short-term and long-term, the kind of things that you think we ought to be watching as this program progresses?
Well, I actually wanted to get to your point about people being able to stay in the community, because I think it's an incredibly important point. And one of the reasons why, if you go back historically, why we have these fences that are, in some cases, freeways, in some cases, railroad tracks, whatever it is, in our transportation system, is that the communities that we're talking about didn't have the kind of political power to vet those issues and successfully beat them back when these pieces of infrastructure were put in place. And I think part of what we have to work on now, and it's great to have local leaders focused on this, is creating a conversation about how infrastructure doesn't cut people off, but how it brings us together. And that's a conversation, frankly, that is best at the local level anyway. It's not about like how many miles of road we build. It's that road over there that's creating a barrier to this family that's trying to get to work. And I see this in a macro perspective, but I think that our victories at the individual level, at the family level, are so important, because if we create that ripple in 5 cities, 20 cities, and show that we can actually do this and we can coordinate at the federal level, the visioning at the local level across the country is going to change dramatically. So I think part of what this is doing, again, is empowering local communities to really rethink what they're doing. But part of the work that has to happen is that the communities themselves have to be engaged in that work. The people who live in the communities we're talking about need to be part of the conversation at the table and part of the decision making.
We have about 5 minutes and great questions. Thank you for these questions. So I'm going to give you 3, and you can just answer them in your closing remarks, any one that you would like to hit. One which I love, and it came in 2 different ones, is what can this audience do to help? I love it when the audience asks what they can do to help. And the audience consists of people who run think tanks and researchers and community-based organizations and staffers and the usual. Let me tell you the other 2 questions. The other question has to do with violence in rural communities, often not addressed and not lifted up, wondering whether Promise Zones will do anything about that. And the last question, and I think a lot of people probably are wondering, is what about those communities that weren't choice, weren't promised, and couldn't compete this time? They wonder, will they really be competitive as the program goes forward? So those were 3 questions that maybe we can answer. Yes, Secretary Foxx.
Can I jump in on that one? Both Shaun and Tom have mentioned 2 things that I think are really important for this audience. And one of them is that I come from a city, I grew up in a city, but poverty isn't just a city problem. It is a rural problem as much as it is an urban problem. And when we talk about poverty, we need to be talking about it in those terms. And I think that's something we can all do a better job of. The second point is that as we're trying to establish a national dialogue about this, I think when we talk about it in those terms, we actually depoliticize it. Because it is not a Democratic or Republican problem. It's an American problem, and it's eating us away. It's eating away the fabric of families and the fabric of our quality of life as we know it. And it's not that the folks who are poor are doing that, it's that we are doing things to reinforce it. And if we can dial that back some and create opportunities for people to actually have a lifeline of meaningful work, meaningful quality of life, meaningful educational experience, meaningful infrastructure, it's going to make a big difference for all of us in this country. I just think it's very important for us not to get cordoned off into different pockets of talking about this. It's important to come together.
Thank you. Secretary Donovan?
Hard to follow you now. So a couple different things on the different questions. We have heard concern about, we limited the Promise Zones this year, the competition of the first 5, to a relatively narrow group. It included folks who had Choice Neighborhoods implementation grants, Promise Neighborhoods implementation grants, burn criminal justice grants in urban areas. Tom could talk about specifically what you needed to have in rural areas, part of Strike Force, and there were a few other things, or in Native communities, like a Sustainable Communities grant. Those were, just to be clear, we wanted to make sure that we were starting in places where there was already a great deal of momentum, where they were past planning and into implementation. But we're not going to have the same restriction on the next 15. So there is going to be a broader ability for a much larger group of communities to apply. The second thing I would say is we're going to do everything we can to make sure that strong applications, good work that's being done in communities gets the light of day and gets funding in other ways. For example, we published the finalists that were above a certain criteria in the competition because we want our friends in foundations and in other places to be able to see that, hey, these are great applications. They didn't make the top 5, but they are very much worth looking at and investing in. And so that's important. And as I said earlier, part of that is Burn Criminal Justice has been a critical partner. Eric Holder's not here today, but I did a panel with him the other day on this. He has got religion on it. He is all in. And you all know that if kids can't be safe, we're going to fail, right? If families can't be safe, there are huge implications to that. So that's a big part of it. Last thing I just say is, what can you all do? One, we got to invest more in these communities. And Anthony made the point about how do we depoliticize it. I think it is exactly right. One of the things that's encouraging to us is that we have seen around the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty, discussion on both sides of the aisle about what more can we do about the challenges of poverty in our country. But we all have to make sure this isn't just around big anniversaries of the War on Poverty, right? Every day we have to be making the case that this is bad for every American. It's not just bad for the folks growing up in communities that have concentrated poverty. It is bad for all of us as Americans, and we've got to get active, get more active in making that case. And the last thing I would just say is to ask, just as we're trying to do here up on this stage and in the work that we're doing across our agencies, I would ask all of you to figure out how you get out of your silos too. I just give you one example. Some smart transportation planner in Detroit figured out an app called Text My Bus. Okay? They were thinking about a kid trying to get to school, standing out at a bus stop, a sitting duck for crime. Right? In a neighborhood with too many broken buses in Detroit, too long waiting at the bus stops, and a simple app that allows them to sign up and say, hey, your bus is 2 blocks away down the street. Time to come out of your apartment and catch your bus, right? That was because that transportation planner didn't think of themselves as a transportation planner. They thought of themselves as somebody whose job was to keep kids healthy, safe, doing well in school. And if we can all bring that perspective, figure out how to get out of our silos, whatever it is that you do, and work to make these communities places where kids don't grow up with their futures determined by their zip codes, that's the work that you all can be doing as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Excellent point that Shaun and Anthony make. I'd just make 2 additional comments. On the issue of violence in rural America, I think folks were surprised when I spoke up about the need for us to be able to finance more mental health clinics in rural areas. And USDA, through its community facility program, has resources to help finance the construction or the equipping of mental health clinics. You may not think of USDA in that context, but we are going to contribute $50 million towards an effort to expand mental health access. To sort of work off of Shaun's point, don't wait for us. Don't wait for the next 15 promise zones to be announced. Create your own promise zones. Partner with neighboring organizations and groups that you're aware of. Develop a similar program where you break down the silos, as Shaun suggested, and focus on areas. Allow us to multiply our impact, take the model, perfect it, be creative with it. There's no reason why there can't be an enlarging of this idea beyond the 15 additional promise zone areas that we're going to announce, or beyond the various programs. Learn all about our programs and put your own promise zone together. Don't wait for us.
Well, I'm sorry.
In light of the passage of the USDA in regards to the actually food stamps, and we're talking about this, and you mentioned the Farm Bill. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's rare that I have an opportunity to address the cabinet, but I mean, I think it's a real issue about the food stamp cuts, and why would we pass a Farm Bill that would have substantive cuts to the food stamp program?
All right. Sure.
We'll take that question, and then we're going to have to end the panel. So don't just take this as we can all do that, but we will take it. Yeah. It's okay. No, yes, we're taking the question.
Sure,
Thank you.
sure. And I appreciate you asking it. First of all, What Congress is doing is it's essentially raising the requirement in primarily northeastern states for folks who qualify for SNAP automatically. If you qualify today for $1 of low-income heating assistance, you automatically qualify for SNAP. The reality is that probably gets people involved in the SNAP program that otherwise wouldn't qualify for the SNAP program if they had to apply through the normal channels. So Congress is essentially suggesting that the SNAP program needs to be for people who need the SNAP program. They're raising that number from $1 to $20. Now, when doing that, they may very well now catch people who would, in fact, be eligible for the SNAP program. It doesn't mean that they won't get SNAP. And that's the thing that's being missed in this conversation. It just puts the onus and burden on us at USDA to do an ever-increasing and better job of outreach to those folks so that those who are eligible will still be able to apply and get the benefits. I'll tell you, I will not be apologetic about what we're doing at SNAP at USDA, and here's why. 20 years ago, roughly 50% of all SNAP beneficiaries were receiving SNAP benefits. Today in this administration, we're at 80%, and I'm proud of that. And I don't think we're going to see a backward trend as a result of what's being done in this legislation. Then you have to look at the magnitude of everything else that's being done, and honestly, we'd have to have another segment to go on about all the good stuff that's in there to create economic opportunity, ladders of opportunity, to take the edge off of poverty, housing, job creation. I'd be more than happy to have further discussion with you, but I wouldn't be quite as concerned as maybe you were when you came here. I think there are ways to handle the people that truly need the help. They're going to get the help.
Thank you. I'm going to have to close this down. I just want to say one thing in closing. It was 1987 when I started a local community building organization trying to take what we knew about place work and create policies at a local level to advance it. And I must say, the progress from then till now, while that is quite a long time, but the progress from then to now has really been stunning to see the way that the federal government is now embracing this place-based work, thinking about how to break down your own silos and really being in partnership with people in local communities as they struggle to create communities of opportunity. Thank you for your leadership.
Yeah, thank you.
Now we're going to transition to the other panel. because of it?
Well, folks are hoping to see new housing, definitely. Of course, the center of the choice component is to tear down and rebuild an old public housing development. So, you know, San Antonio, it's in the Southwest, so we have a lot of suburban sprawl because we're not landlocked. And so we've had a lot of new housing starts further out from the inner city, but we haven't really had any in the inner city, which is the Promise Zone area. And so we're hoping to see, you know, new housing. We also want to focus on employment in the area because we have underemployment of the residents in that area, and we hope to see some businesses come in to provide those employment opportunities. And also, just on a real basic level, just retail. You know, people drive to other parts of San Antonio in order to meet some of their basic needs, and we want to make the case that, you know, East San Antonio is a great place to do business, that, you know, we have some disposable income and that our neighborhoods want to be served by the same sorts of retail that we have in other parts of town.
Do you get the sense that the Promise Zones acknowledges the economic importance of community life in ways that perhaps some of the other programs have not?
Yes, definitely. I think that is going to be one of the advantages of us having this designation. Of course, through Promise Neighborhood, we were focusing on education, and through Choice, we were focusing on housing, and we had an economic component where we were going to look at a couple of corridors, but now with the Promise Zone designation, that's going to allow us to more fully and in a more robust fashion focus on the economic development component to go beyond, you know, some of the plans that we had in conjunction with the Choice grant.
Thank you so much. Philip, same questions to you about what you're building upon and what it'll mean, what you hope for.
Thank you. And first, a word of thanks to you and the organization and the movement that you've helped foster, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
The Choctaw Nation is very privileged to have been designated. I speak here on behalf of Chief Pyle, Greg Pyle, and the Tribal Council. Many Americans fail to remember that tribal governments are governments, and they were here for a long time, and they've had and carried responsibility for their people and their neighbors for many, many years. And Choctaw Nation is not unlike the other 560-some tribes that are recognized as tribal governments in the country by the United States. They carry a heavy responsibility. In their case, they're the third largest tribe in the country by membership, and their responsibility that they govern over, the land area, they call it the tribal service area, is equal to the land mass total of New Jersey, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. A little larger than the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That is the extent of their geographic service responsibility. So to be designated here in the Promise Zone initiative by the President of the White House is a really important milestone for the Choctaw Nation. And I want to be, on behalf of the Chief and the Tribal Council, extend our gratitude to the White House, the President, and his cabinet, who was so ably represented earlier today, in offering to be partners with the Choctaw Nation in meeting these responsibilities.
So talk a little bit about the place-based work that you'll be building on with the Promise Zones.
Yes, the focus, of course, it's not a new idea for Indians to be focused on their homeland, nor, ironically, is the word promise a new word for Indian ears. The challenge here is, and the good faith that is represented by this administration and the administration of the Choctaw Nation, the challenge is to put legs on this promise like never before. And the hope is that the ongoing efforts, much as are going on in San Antonio and Philadelphia, the ongoing efforts at workforce development that have been there, the thousands, literally thousands of Choctaws and their neighbors who the Choctaw Nation has helped get to the workplace in the last couple of years, will be magnified many-fold as a result of the coordinated one-door idea that the Secretary has just pledged anew in this initiative.
Thank you. In May of 2005, PolicyLink had a big summit in Philadelphia, and then Councilman Nutter welcomed everybody, and a lot has happened since then. But tell us how this Promised Zones effort will help make a difference and build on things that we saw really quite full-blown back in 2005.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Angela. And thanks also to letting us be here. Congratulations to San Antonio, which is, as far as your coordinated effort, really a model, I think, for a number of cities in looking at how do you bring public and private partners together to work on the ground. What we've done has been to take LISC's Sustainable Communities model that focuses on housing, economic development, household income, health, and education in lower income communities, and link that to community plans, particularly HUD Choice neighborhood plan in Mantua that really was a neighborhood that did not have a lot of capacity. And the HUD Choice neighborhood planning process allowed us to provide support to organizations that were really eager to work in their community, combined with the planning process of a larger CDC and the planning process of a university. So what we had on the ground was a very good partnership, collaborative with LISC, anchor institution, and community-based organizations with support of HUD. That then allowed us to hire Donna Griffith, who we hope will be able to join us, who was able to work with the community to build capacity, obtain the Department of Justice Byrne grant, and that laid the framework for our work for the last 3 years, building capacity, planning together, working together on early stage housing, education, economic development initiatives. And when the Promise Zone came along, we had a wonderful opportunity in that the Nutter administration had very recently completely revamped its approach to poverty and fighting poverty in the city of Philadelphia. And the Shared Prosperity Plan, which was a citywide plan, not a place-based plan, was a great overlay that linked with our goals in the sustainable communities and the work that Drexel was doing. So it was a natural fit for us to come together, build on the work we were already doing, work with the new Office of Community and Economic Empowerment, and apply for a Promise Zone. For us, it's really, as I'd say, the Promise Zone designation is icing on a cake that we've already been baking, and we're very excited now to have all the federal agencies coming together to work with us in supporting the work of residents in Mantua and West Philadelphia.
Thank you. We'll come back and talk about all of this, but I think we actually have people joining us by video now. And if it's true, yes. I want to turn first to Dixon Slingerland, who is the Executive Director of the Youth Policy Institute, to talk about how the Promised Neighborhood effort will help build upon what you've learned with other place-based efforts underway. I see we have others too, but I'm going to start with Dixon. Yeah.
Hi, good morning.
Hi. Yes, quite well. Dixon, some people here who may not be familiar with Los Angeles might wonder about the inclusion of Hollywood. That might not sound like one of the poorest neighborhoods. You want to say a word about that? I guess not. I think it is a poor neighborhood. Can you hear me now, Dixon? Okay, I wonder if anyone's going to hear me, because what I was going to do is move on to Jerry Ricketts from Kentucky. Can we do that? All right, I guess not. Dixon, you can't hear me, can you? No. Oh, all right. Hello, Jerry, can you hear me? Wonderful. Jerry Ricketts from Southeastern Kentucky, the development director of the Kentucky Highlands Investment Corporation, which is the lead agency for the Promise Zones effort. Jerry, we've been talking about what it means to get the Promise Zones designation, how it builds on place-based work that was already underway in your community. Congratulations, by the way.
Lessons we've learned from other place-based efforts. We've learned that you have to report to the residents of the area and constantly thinking that you have to celebrate your success. You tell what's being accomplished. That's the same hope.
Thank you. Celebrate the success and connect to residents. I'm not sure that the video is going to work out as we hoped. There's a question I want to come back to Dixon with, but I think that you can also answer this, Ivy, because my question is how you keep all the actors from falling over each other. It is so exciting to have Promise and Choice and Burn, but what does that feel like in the local community?
It feels like it's a new full-time job to manage all the relationships and to determine what are the best means for consistent communication. So what we've done in San Antonio is a couple of things. We have several, first we have a coordinating council that includes myself and the mayor and several other leads, heads of the key agencies that are involved, and we meet every few months to make some of the strategic decisions. Then at the staff level, we have an implementation working group because, I mean, just those little things like, so the city staff, they already have a street maintenance schedule, and now we're building a whole new housing development and trying to coordinate and make sure we're not fixing a street that's going to be torn up and all those kind of things we're trying to manage and ensure that we have all the right resources allocated in all our respective budgets. So the implementation group meets regularly, and then we have another group that meets on a weekly basis that includes myself and several of the key partners as well. Then on top of all that, we all know what's going on and we see each other all the time, but the general community is not aware of all the minutiae in the day-to-day. So are refining that component as well, how to communicate to the public about what's going on. And some of the programs have their own structures to include the public, like the Promise neighborhood. They have an advisory council that includes residents. So it's just constantly trying to communicate with each other to let everyone know what's going on, what challenges are upcoming, what budgetary needs there are, what opportunities there are, what's coming down the horizon.
Do you think that you're going to have to invent some ways to stay on the same page, or do you think the structure that's in place will allow you to be able to do that?
I think that we've worked at it long enough now that the structure that we have in place is working pretty well. Again, I think the key challenge is continuing to communicate with the public at large on what's happening.
I'm tempted to try to go back to Dixon to that question, or should I not try that again? And we also haven't heard from Donna, who probably would have something to say on this issue because she leads the burn and the choice work. Oh, Dixon, can you hear me? But now we can't hear you. I can't hear you. Say something? Okay, good. So the question is, what's it like trying to coordinate all those efforts? Is that, are people stumbling over each other, or do you have a structure to make it work well?
Yeah, that's an absolutely critical question. Very large. In our Promised Neighborhood application, and we now have 40 partners that we're giving sub-grants to through Promised Neighborhoods to provide different parts of the cradle, college, and career spectrum. And so we kept that approach as we went into choice and burn. I guess part of the benefit of having a large collaborative to start is we already had a lot of folks at the table, like the police department and the city attorney's office. So when Burn came along, we were already sort of part of this effort going back a couple of years, so it wasn't a new thing for them. And then obviously coming into the Promise Zone competition, where we ended up with 90 partners who made commitments as part of the application. It was really just continuing to build and bring in new players in areas like economic development that hadn't necessarily been part of the previous efforts. So I think it's worked well. It's a very large program. It takes a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of work for the city of LA as the lead to help coordinate this effort. But we've been generally pleased with having so many players at the table with so many different skill sets.
You couldn't hear me. I was asking you about Hollywood. You've included in your catchment area, and I was asking if that also is a poor neighborhood. Did you? All right, so let's try Donna, and if this doesn't work, we're gonna let the video go. Donna, I want to introduce you to the audience. Donna Griffin, who works with the Mount Vernon CDC on the Choice Neighborhoods and the Burn Criminal Justice Grant. Welcome. We have your colleague here, Andrew, and he's told us how excited the community is and the things that you're building on. I'd like to hear your voice on that, but also have you talk about how you're coordinating the work that was already going on with the new opportunities.
Good morning. How's everyone? So, yeah, I would just say that we were fortunate enough to have a Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant, and we took that opportunity to set up a steering committee, but also task forces, which were led by our steering committee partners and a resident to work on our priorities connected with the Choice Planning Grant. So we had that experience, and once we actually decided to apply for the Burn grant, same type of strategy. And so the public safety task force broke off into a group and worked on putting together a Burn strategic. We were successful in winning that award. And so moving forward with the Promise Zone, certainly I see that as an opportunity to move implementation of the Choice Neighborhoods Plan forward for Angela. And we certainly have a great deal of additional partners sitting at the table with us for Promise Zone, which again moves things forward for us. So leading that effort is the Philadelphia Community Empowerment and Opportunity, CEO we call them, and they will be managing this structure moving forward. And so we've divided into 4 priorities, one being educational, the other public safety and housing, along with economic opportunity, investment, and jobs. And there is also a resident engagement piece that we'll be working on as well. So the CEO office will actually lead this effort in terms of coordinating all of the different partners. And each group has already had a meeting, and we're looking at how do we take what we're doing already and coordinate that, collaborate on it, and work together to advance the plans for the Manchester community.
Thank you. Clearly, there's a lot of work going on in all these communities. I'm going to come back and ask you about how the state is supporting the work, how you're interacting with the state, and how what kind of leeway you have to change course when things aren't working. But I wanted to turn to Philip for a moment to talk more about the Choctaw grant, the Promise neighborhood there. You alluded to this when you said, quite familiar with the word promise. In your community, what do people need to see early to feel that this is really something that is different?
Well, I think broadband would be nice, and I guess now we have something in common with Hollywood. But seriously, job opportunity is such an enduring part of all of the other aspects here, from kids getting the right kind of education, good education, and administrative structures delivering the social safety net services that are so vital to housing and access to markets. Jobs are really a key part of keeping families together, and jobs are what have disappeared from much of rural America and certainly from much of Indian country. And so at Choctaw, a challenge here to show the people some legs on this promise is to bolster and really put a jetpack or octane in the tank behind the Career Development Center that we've got going there now. Has helped 4,800 jobs be created. These are real jobs, not theoretical jobs, real homes, real families with a wage earner, connecting to private sector, not all government sector work. Choctaw is one of the largest employers in the southeastern area of Oklahoma. They know how to hire and manage a workforce, and they are doing a lot of training efforts in conjunction with the state of Oklahoma, Eastern Oklahoma State University, and a number of other private sector initiatives in the area to match skills and build skills and match them with real jobs that produce products and services that get them to market.
Are you seeing or expecting that the state services and support will expand or be more effective because of the Promise Zones designation?
Yes, we're very hopeful of that. This has a real, this being the Promise Zone designation has a catalytic kind of effect on attention that is brought to bear on problems that are endemic. The Secretary used the phrase persistent poverty. That certainly is a definition of southeastern Oklahoma, this 10.5 county area where all of the measures, statewide and nationwide, all of those measures are really at the bottom of that ladder. So if we're truly putting rungs on the ladder to climb out of that situation, the state has shown some renewed interest. Our neighbors, small town mayors, city council members, county leadership have shown a renewed interest to partner with the Choctaw Nation on their common problems, which, we're neighbors, and because this is not a reservation-based tribe, but a tribal service area tribe, There are members and non-members who have long existed together for generations as neighbors, and their problems are in many ways similar. So the partnership that Choctaw has put in place with 85 school districts in southeastern Oklahoma to work at early childhood education, summer programs for K through second grade, working at that early learning, reading, and rudimentary elementary school skills. That kind of partnership is what we want to expand dramatically.
Thank you. The same question to the two of you about whether the state is involved, what more the state could do. Is this catalyzing more state partnership?
Well, I certainly think there's opportunity for us to expand our working relationship with the state on this tremendous initiative, but we have had some successes dealing with certain agencies. I'll just give a couple of examples. We've kind of focused on, particularly with the Promise neighborhood, which is in the Promise zone, on what are projects that we can leave behind beyond the 5-year grant period. And so working with our school district, the San Antonio Independent School District, we came up with the idea of creating an early college high school at a community college campus in the zone. And so our state education agency approved the school district to be able to do that. So we're very excited that students who live in the zone will be able to go to high school on a college campus. I think that can be really transformational. And then, of course, the other area where we will be working closely with the state is in trying to obtain low-income housing tax credits to facilitate the housing development in conjunction with our housing authority. But I'm sure there are many other opportunities that we need to sit down and think about.
Are there any state people sitting on any of those committees that you talked about?
No, and I'm sitting here thinking about the work we need to do when we get back home on engaging them at that level. I think that could really help us to move work along.
Andrew?
Yeah, in Philadelphia, we just had this same conversation that we hadn't had the state as involved in our work. Where we've had the greatest cooperation has been on the housing front, particularly with our State Housing Finance Agency and our Department of Community and Economic Development. And the department has already provided some funding commitments specifically for home repairs around areas where we would be doing low-income housing tax credit projects and larger scale developments, in part back to your equity question, to make sure that long-term residents are also able to benefit from the work that goes on.
There are a couple of questions here about issue areas, so I want to mention them. One is asking about the issue of health and health surveys and how you see health being impacted. I think that's particularly important because I suspect it was just in this room on February 13th that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation released the latest report from the Commission for a Healthier America, and their focus was on building healthy communities. And so how is health figuring? And the other one is whether or not you're using AmeriCorps Vistas, and if you thought about how to incorporate them into the work. Anybody?
Well, AmeriCorps Vista programs have been in Indian country, and Choctaw Nation has, I believe, had a few. We look forward to the added opportunities as a result of Promise Zone designation to have more of Americans' finest young smart folk to come show up and be ready to serve in those ways. Like any program, whether it's Peace Corps, Vista, that has a lifetime of impact on those people. They come back to their home communities with a tie to the service area. They come to DC and become policymakers, folks like you and the secretaries. That's the background that is provided by those programs. And anytime Indian country can get greater exposure of their challenges to the rest of America, we're all for that.
And what about the health? How do the community health surveys and tracking health outcomes fit into the Promise Zone plans? Is a specific question from the audience.
Well, on healthcare, it's one of actually the signature efforts of accomplishment of the Choctaw Nation in the last 20 years. They've taken over the public health service functions of hospitals and clinics formerly run for them by the U.S. Public Health Service and administered them under a program called tribal self-governance. And they now have the opportunity to be serving everyone in their region very effectively with state-of-the-art healthcare delivery. And so the opportunity to match wellness programs, food, wholesome food, lifestyle, all of those more recently discovered or rediscovered aspects to healthcare that are now on our front pages. That is really a frontier area for the Choctaw Nation, not only with their own membership, but with their neighbors. What food is at the store that serves both Indian and non-Indian alike? What kind of recreational and physical health opportunities are there for the entire community? And so this is a real important area of growth that Choctaw Nation is looking forward to.
You want to comment on either of those? Sure.
Yes, we are working with VISA volunteers. They are mainly working in our schools that are in the zone through City Year and Communities in School, I believe.
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure that there are probably some other opportunities that we could think about. But health, we've been having a lot of conversations about that. There's been a group of residents that have gotten together and talked about the fact that we don't have as many facilities that our residents can go to within the Promise Zone. And so we've been working with Bexar County. San Antonio is in Bexar County, and Bexar County provides health services. The city has a metro health department, but what we do is limited. So we've been working with Bexar County to see if they could possibly build a facility, and we've applied for grants for operating funds. And so we've been having some robust dialogue related mainly to the availability of a facility to provide preventive care and services, because that's been noted as lacking in the community. Where we still probably could have more dialogue is on the recreation and fitness aspect, but I think we have some good apparatus already in place. The mayor has a fitness council, and so we could probably have a focus in the Promise Zone area. And also, in listening to the previous panel, the Secretary's comments on working with some of the grocers, I think we definitely need to pursue that, because we have food deserts in the Promise Zone, and we need to have some conversations. We're kind of a two-grocer town, so that makes it kind of difficult. They haven't really seen the economic opportunity within the Promise Zone, and so we need to start getting creative about access to healthy food for our residents.
Well, you're sitting next to somebody who can talk about that. Philadelphia has really focused, along with Pennsylvania, on getting access to healthy food.
Yes, and we have in the audience representatives of the Food Trust and the Reinvestment Fund, and in addition to LISC. We've all been working on the access to food issue in the city, and that is a place where the state has been a very active partner as well. LISC has provided AmeriCorps volunteers to partners in the Mantua community this fall. That was actually the first time that Philadelphia had received AmeriCorps through the National LISC program. One of them is actually working on health, health survey work. We are working right now. We have a Community Connectors program that Donna helps to oversee, which are residents who are trained to go door to door and exchange information with residents on a variety of issues. In the summer, Drexel will bring community health workers to help coordinate that work, because the Community Connectors don't have specific health training, but the community health workers will be part of those teams and specifically do that outreach. We have lots of hospitals nearby. We don't have a federally qualified health center in the neighborhood, and that is one of our goals over the next several years, to have one within the target area. And then, as part of our application, the Mantua community in particular is a food desert. There are plans to build a small supermarket right in the neighborhood. And as soon as we can do the land acquisition, I think the city will move forward with that, and I think the Promise Zone designation will help. And if we could get the tax credits approved through Congress, that would be a key piece. We've seen it before with previous iterations of tax credits for our neighborhood grocers. It can make a big difference, and it's a key incentive to hiring locally.
Is Jerry on the screen because he wants to jump in on one of these questions? You've got the floor.
Have been working for the last few months on an initiative they call Solar, shaping our Appalachian region, and both of those gentlemen have been encouraging the Promise Zone efforts, and the state is going to give priority to funding that comes through the state, projects from our Promise Zone. We're quite excited about that. And remember, the Congress were hoping to help with the tax credits over on the, when it comes to the Congress from the trade. We're also really trying to work at the local level as best we can. I mentioned the detention services when we're doing our planning. That's done through the state as well. We're bringing most of the programs that they have through the College of Agriculture to our individual counties. And each county has an office in the 8 counties. We're working pretty big geography, and we think that's going to help a lot through those state resources.
Thank you. We have several questions that are really about how the program works in terms of structure and support. One of the questions is there enough technical assistance and the right kind of technical assistance to help you with your challenge of being able to organize things on the ground, being able to access the federal government, thinking about how to bring more flexibility into the program, so technical assistance around that structure stuff. And the other question is whether or not this is structured in a way that you can change as you move forward. We know this is hard to do, that we're having to invent it in some ways as we go along. And the question is, do you have the flexibility to change as you see that changes need to be made? Anybody who would like to jump in, feel free to do so.
Well, I'll jump in on one of the key components, which is transforming educational outcomes, because so much stems from that. And in relation to flexibility, I will just say that it is challenging working with the school district because they have so many demands that are put on them by the state. And so that has been something that we've had to work at for a couple of years. We've made some progress, but I think that the folks that are, working on all those accountability measures and the way in which the school system operates, they are still kind of in that silo and not keyed into the role that thriving, successful schools play in revitalization of the community. But as far as working with the federal government, we've had great access in getting questions answered and technical assistance that's been provided. Of course, we're on the front end with Promise Zone, but with everything that's happened so far, I'm very encouraged. And also I was very encouraged in listening to the secretary's talk in the previous panel about the Promise Zone creating the opportunity for the federal workers and the different agencies to tap into their creativity. I think that was a very encouraging statement to hear, and that we're looking forward to seeing that played out on the ground.
Terrific. Either of you want to comment?
Well, technical assistance comes in different forms, and not to try to be humble and not arrogant here, but Choctaw Nation knows how to train people into the workforce. We don't need technical assistance as to the how, but we don't have enough resources to do that, and the need is really outpacing the ability. So technical assistance to chase federal dollars, the variety of, yes, absolutely. This single door that the Secretary mentioned, as opposed to 15 or 16 doors, you bet, we could really use that technical assistance. But our Choctaw Career Development Center helped, and we can show measured outcomes here already. 4,800 people get trained into jobs they could not fulfill until they went through that training, and they're now working. That cost per trainee about $3,600. And their average annual income increase, they were underemployed, their average annual income increase of each of these 4,800 trainees, now workers, is $13,000. Now, that's a great return on investment. What's stopping us from doing that fourfold more, tenfold more It's the lack of resources and the capacity to, so we would love technical assistance to help us find those resources, whether it's private sector or public sector. On that piece of it, I think Choctaw knows how to do it.
Okay. Anything about?
I think Donna would be able to speak more directly to, I think, the high quality of technical assistance that the community received both from HUD and is receiving from the Department of Justice. So I think based on the assistance that we've received so far, I'm optimistic that with Promise Zone, the technical assistance will flow. But
Donna, you're there. Did you hear the question?
Here. Well, certainly for us, we've had a great deal of technical assistance from both HUD and I will say a good part of that technical assistance has been in the form of communication. And so both agencies have really been forthcoming in terms of to connecting us with potential partners or resources who might be recipients of other HUD grants or burn grants who are doing work similar to our with those folks who are doing similar work and maybe have been more successful. I would echo the gentleman from the Choctaw Nation and that, yes, we do each other and share our challenges as well as our successes. It's very helpful in moving the work in each of our communities forward.
Thank you. I have a closing question. We're at the end. And just as we asked the secretaries how we can make sure that it's not just the 5 or the 20 that get the benefit of Promise Zones. And the secretaries responded that they hope that the cultural and organizational shifts that will happen as they work effectively with the 20 will change the way that federal resources are available across the nation and that the lessons can be shared. I want to ask you the same question because while I'm sure your communities are thrilled for you, there are parts of your communities that are not within the zone. And I know they're wondering, but what about us? And how do you think about this opportunity to be able to benefit your entire community, not just those that are within the designated zone?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I was sitting here and I wanted to acknowledge some of my partners that are here. 2 of my council colleagues are here, Councilwoman Shirley Gonzalez and Councilman Ron Nierenberg are also on the San Antonio City Council. And I'm on my 3rd term. We have 2-year terms, so this is my 3rd go round. And I can say that some of the previous councils had some members who weren't as excited about some of the work that we were doing. But where we are now, it's really encouraging that people have a vision. We've kind of coalesced around the inner city vision, which I talked about the fact there have been a lot of suburban development. So that was really transformational for us, that people who represented the suburban areas were focused in on the fate of the inner city, because I think we've all come to realize that San Antonio, our city as a whole, can't thrive if every part of San Antonio doesn't thrive. And so it's taken us a while to get there, but I'm very excited that we have. And I think also that we have adopted the attitude that, you know, what we're doing in our Promise Zone is informing what we'll do in the next part of town, the next time we get to another designated area, or can help inform activities that are currently going on in other parts of town. So that's the way that we've been looking at it, and I hope that that sentiment will continue. But I am grateful that the mayor has been focused on that, and that the current council has been very supportive of that effort. But it's important to communicate to folks about the benefits long-term for everyone, especially when you're in a geographic council district. Form of government.
Thank you. Yeah, Andrew, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think, and LISC works in other parts of the city. You know, 1.5 million people. There's a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of need. But I think there's lessons to be learned, not just in terms of the designation, but in how we got to the designation. That collaborative effort and figuring out how do you engage residents as well as institutions and community-based organizations, government entities, all trying to work in the same direction. And that is a lesson that we hope we can share regardless of whether you're in a particular zone or not. I think the other piece that's important, and you asked this question earlier in the first panel, if there's a fear among some folks, both in the zone and outside, that you'll be too successful and you'll be successful for people who aren't there now, but who come in and take advantage. And we've already, even prior to getting the designation, tried to build an equitable development strategy into our work. There are some real risks, and there's certainly real perceptions and fears, and trying to make sure that everybody knows that this is a process that can be beneficial to everybody will make it that much easier for other parts of the city to come together and say, okay, this is really for us, not just for some other them.
All right. Do you think I'll be able to ask anyone on video that question? Yeah, we're gonna. Yes. Jerry, did you want to answer that question about how you can make sure that not just those in the designated zone, but others who surround will be able to benefit from the good work that will happen? Heard me. Sorry. So I'm going to go to.
Sure. Connect in. Let me just answer it this way for the Choctaw Nation. I mentioned at the top that there's over 550 tribes. They're all different. Many of them language, culture as different as Europe is different, right? So when you speak Indians in Indian country, it's really like talking about Europe, right? So, however, like in Europe, all of those nations watch each other's successes and failures and the lessons to be learned. And I think Indian country is looking very, very carefully at Choctaw Nation and at the administration. To its credit, one of the many accomplishments of this administration vis-a-vis Indian country is that they have attempted to coordinate like none before it the delivery of federal services to Indian country with a White House Council, cabinet-wide White House Council thrust. It takes its manifestation in this promise zones. One of the first five, is an Indian nation with a very challenging rural service delivery area. Many of the pockets of poverty, persistent poverty in Indian country are rural. Not all, but most are rural-based. And so those areas are looking very carefully at the collaborative path that brought Choctaw Nation to this point, and we'll be watching it try to meet this challenge by creating additional outcomes that we can all be proud of.
Thank you. We'll be done in about 3 minutes. I understand that the president of Berea College is in the audience. Could you answer, since we can't connect Jerry, to this notion about benefiting beyond the zone?
I'm happy to. The Promise Zone in southeast Kentucky serves 8 counties. Among those counties are some of the poorest counties in the country, and they're poor because this is an area that has principally served the nation through production of coal. That industry is changing, and as a result, there's tremendous economic dislocation. The measures put in place in those 8 counties will benefit the rest of eastern Kentucky, where there are similar problems. So I think there's a lot of excitement, just as there is among the Indian nations in the eastern half of Kentucky and the rest of Appalachia in this opportunity. So thanks.
Thank you for being here. Might we get Dixon? And then we're going to... No, we can't get him? All right. Then I know that he would have said, no, I do, because I'm from California too, and I know Dixon. Dixon would have said that Los Angeles is vast, and there are so many challenges. And he runs one of the largest social service agencies in the area. And so this isn't the only thing they're doing. So not only does the Promise Zone help to make their agency sharper in the work they're doing all across, but because they're so influential, they have a vast influence on the government at every level. I think this has been a terrific discussion. We are so proud of the work you're doing. We're really pulling for you, and I think that this whole audience hopes that what you do will help this commitment from the federal government to spread all across the land and engage states as well. Thank you very much. Any announcements before we go, or we just adjourn? thank you for your participation, and I hope this was informative.